Superpod 2020, raising money for sport relief. 2 days of great comedy and sporting podcasts. Desert Island Dicks. First and 10. Sports Spiel. Anything but footy. The Dredgeland Podcast Spectacular. And more. Saturday 7th and Sunday 8th of March at The Social in Southampton. And you can be there too. Free entry until 7 p.m. and then ticket only from 7 p.m. Tickets available now at superpod.co.uk. If you can't be in Southampton, the whole event will be streamed live online on your smart speaker and on Facebook Live. Find Superpod UK on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram and use the hashtag Superpod2020. For more information, visit superpod.co.uk.
Gymnast Grace Harrison will be known by many as the first female Isle of Man gymnast to reach an individual Commonwealth's final. She achieved that feat at the Glasgow Games in 2014 at the age of just 19. The sport had been her life, and understandably dreams of going to the Gold Coast 2018 quickly became her next focus. But instead, Grace retired at the age of 23. The reason was a mixture of injuries, and what followed was a degree of resentment to the sport she once loved. In her words, it felt like the end of the world. But Grace soon had an experience that made her stop and think. Towards the end of her university degree, she became seriously ill with sepsis. That experience put a lot of things into perspective for her, and eventually she started to fall back in love with her sport and with life once again. We recorded this interview back in December at the Mintridge Foundation's training days. That's a charity that Grace is an ambassador for, and through her own life experiences mentioned in this episode, Grace hopes to give back in some way through the charity's vital work. Grace, thank you for coming on to the podcast. I know it's been a particularly busy 2 days as well because we're here at the Mintridge training session in Witham on the Hill, so there's plenty of workshops that you're getting thrown into at the deep end as well. But first and foremost, how has today's session been? Because I know we've just done a presenting session and also yesterday's mental health session as well.
Yeah, it's been really good. It's great to have all the ambassadors, or a majority of the ambassadors, all together in one place, which doesn't happen very often because everyone's here, there and everywhere. And the presenters have been really, really insightful and given lots of good hints and tips moving forward.
How was your own little presentation? Because you were one of the ones who had to get put up on stage in front of everyone. It
helped practice kind of on the spot thinking, but it was good to get out there and get some good feedback as well from the other ambassadors.
Plenty of experience in sort of winging it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Which we're all good at in some ways.
Yeah.
But I'll start off then with sort of your own sporting journey, really, because it is quite an impressive one. You've also got the gymnastics that you started at a very young age, but I suppose what people will know you for most of all is your achievements at the Commonwealth Games and being the first Isle of Man gymnast to qualify for an individual final. Does it still sound a little bit weird or feel weird when you hear your name associated with that, but pride as well?
Yeah, it does a little bit. I think going into the Games, because we hadn't had any Isle of Man female gymnasts compete before, there was no expectations, no one knew kind of what to expect, what our placings would be, how likely a final was going to be. So to actually go there with kind of no pressure and then to make the final was just a complete bonus, and I could go out and enjoy it and kind of always know I've got that history behind me, which is really nice.
Exactly. Obviously gymnastics is a big part of your life, but can you kind of sum up what it means to you and how important it has been in making you the person you are today?
Oh, it's absolutely massive. So I started gymnastics when I was 3 years old, and then retired at 23. So 20 years, and I just, from the moment I first went in the gym, running around as a crazy 3-year-old, all the way until 23, I absolutely loved it. And I wouldn't change anything about the journey or about the sport. I think I wouldn't be who I am today without all of the experiences, the positive and the negative ones. And yeah, just absolutely love the sport.
And how much effort did it take to get to where you did with the Commonwealth Games result? Because people can see all the stuff on TV and in the competition, but the hard graft behind the scenes is probably the bit that counts the most.
Yeah, just so much hard work. So I took a year out before going to university to train as a full-time athlete for the Games, which brought a lot of stresses with itself. There was its own type of pressure that I'm giving up a year of my life, this better be worth it type thing. And that was just hours and hours in the gym, a lot of it spent on my own. So I trained morning and evening, and a lot of my teammates were still at school, so they didn't come to the morning sessions, so it was just me and my coach in a big, cold, empty gym. And it's that classic, what you do behind closed doors makes what you do on the stage, makes you be able to perform. But yeah, I think it's hard to understand what goes on behind those closed doors until you've experienced it and felt that slight isolation of feeling like you're on your own, and then until you go out and everyone's behind you.
How do you deal with that pressure? Because that's always the bit I'm interested in, because a lot of people could get halfway down that road and think, no, it's too much. So what is it about you that meant you kept going?
I think pressure, it's a difficult one. I think if you go in terms of you have your own self-expectations on you, and I put a lot of pressure on myself of what I wanted to achieve and what I would classify as a good performance or a bad performance. And that would be both in training and in competition. And I think when you're on your own especially, you have a lot of time to reflect on what you've done. And actually, if you're a self-critic, it gives that opportunity to possibly take that to a level too far where you're not actually giving yourself the benefit of the doubt. But in terms of the competition environment, if you put that pressure on in training and you're used to kind of dealing with those nerves and the self-expectations, actually you've experienced that before, so when you go out and compete on the bigger stage, you've experienced all that before, and you kind of just go in your zone, go on autopilot and do the job as you have done training.
Exactly. Why retire at 23?
Classic case of injuries. So the well thought out plan was go to Gold Coast Commonwealth Games, and then after that it would coincide with me finishing university. I'd finish gymnastics and then move on to kind of the real world. But unfortunately my plan didn't go as I expected. A year before the Games, I got an ankle injury, recovered from the ankle injury. Week after getting back into training, I had ligament damage in my elbow, and just in terms of the timing was just rubbish, and it just didn't give me enough time to get back to the level I needed to be at to perform. So unfortunately had to decide to hang up my handguards at 23.
How did it feel rather when you've obviously got this laid out plan for yourself, and it doesn't go to plan? Is it easy to deal with that?
Not at all. Very lost. It's kind of you set out a plan, you know what you want to do, and I'm a very kind of structured person. I plan everything and tick it off as it goes along. But actually, you get faced with a curveball, and it's different than you'd planned and expected. You kind of have to reevaluate and decide, right, what's important now. Because up until that point, all that was important was gymnastics and at the time my degree. But actually, I went from having both of them to finishing my degree and finishing gymnastics all within the space of a few months. So I went from having so much to focus on, things that I'd always done, to suddenly kind of feeling like I had nothing and no direction.
I tie this in with what you talked about yesterday, because a large part of yesterday's session was about sort of transitioning out of sport.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have the time to kind of consider what they want to do.
Yeah.
But yours is just like that, suddenly out of the blue. How long did it take you to sort of work out what you wanted to do and sort of what your new purpose was when before it was all gymnastics?
So I think I knew for about a year that I was injured, and the likelihood is I wasn't gonna get to Gold Coast. But it still took me that year to actually come to terms with that. So I didn't say I'd retired. If someone asked me what I did, I still said I was a gymnast, holding on to that tiny bit of hope that a miracle recovery would happen and I'd be back competing. And actually went through a stage of resenting the sport and I hate it. Why is it making me feel so rubbish and not having any idea about what I want to do? But actually, it was a case of going through that process and shifting focus. And I think delving back into gymnastics in a coaching way after I finished university helped me kind of fall back in love with the sport. And I coached kind of 6, 7, 8-year-olds and kind of seeing their innocence and their enjoyment for the sport. And they weren't there because they wanted to win medals at that stage or go to the Commonwealth Games. They were there because they loved the sport, they loved their teammates, and I think that made me understand why I first got involved in it. And actually it wasn't about reaching that final goal that I'd set for myself. It was about seeing all the lessons I'd learnt along the way, and actually I wouldn't be the person I am without going through everything I did.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, did almost the success that you enjoyed, I suppose, when it came to the difficult side of having to cope with retirement and all that sort of stuff, did it almost trick your brain into thinking that's the reason you got into gymnastics in the first place, is for the successful times, when actually it was just the love of the sport in the first place? Yeah,
definitely. So I know it wasn't until I was about 15, 16 until I actually took it seriously and trained as an athlete. Before that, I just turned up because I absolutely loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the adrenaline, the challenge, and actually there was bits of that as it became more competitive and was working towards the games. But actually I think it's quite easy to forget those things. So looking back, I can now pick those bits out and actually really have really fond memories of the experiences all the way through my career.
Did that ever affect your actual competitions? Because I take that in from speaking to Lizzie Simmons on a previous episode, where she went through a lot of a similar kind of thing once she retired as well, but she kind of explained that because she was putting so much pressure on herself when she was competing, that had an adverse effect when she was actually competing, that she'd feel very anxious, like before she got in the pool. I don't know if that was something similar or something you managed to, or you were able to manage from your own sort of mindset.
Yeah, so a funny story from Commonwealth Games. So we had numbers on the back of our leotards and pinned them on with safety pins. And before we went to the arena, we were in the village, and I was putting my number on my leotard, and I just could not put this number on, and just had a complete breakdown. I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not competing. I can't do it. It's not happening. And I think that was my explosion. I could then kind of calm down from there and actually kind of get back in the zone and realise what I was going to do.
It was important to have that release for you then.
Yeah, I think sometimes if you kind of hold everything all inside and try and compete with all those nerves and anxiety, it actually makes it so much harder. So actually, it probably worked in my favour, although my mum didn't feel it at the time when she got a panic phone call saying, I can't do it.
And then the retirement side, it's almost like that, but spread out a little bit longer. Then I don't know if you've had another release moment that convinced you into taking up the coaching. At what point did you sort of think that was the line you wanted to go down, and that's how you would fall back in love with the sport?
So as I finished my university degree, in the summer I actually got really ill, and I had sepsis and was in ITU and spent a week or so in the hospital. And actually that was a big point of reflection for me. Actually made me realise how precious life is, and how much actually it's not about whether you compete at a sport, it's about the people around you and actually what do you enjoy and why do you enjoy it. And I think that put everything into perspective. So I think it felt like the end of the world stopping gymnastics, but actually that realised that there are so many people that go through so much more outside of a sporting world, that actually what I went through in retirement from sport is just a tiny thing that's so much easier to overcome than what some people face.
Yeah, and feel free to answer this as openly as you want, but I mean, what was it that sort of put you in hospital in the first place before the sepsis infection came around?
So it was just I just developed sepsis. They don't know what it came from, how I got it. I think it was a bit of a mystery to everyone, really. So it was everything happened very quick, and it was a big shock. Yeah.
Just shock to go through as well.
Yeah.
But like you said, that's kind of the trigger moment where you reevaluate what's important in life. Is that one of the toughest things you've had to go through, or do you kind of have other moments in your life that you've taken and can reevaluate and appreciate what's important now?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the toughest moment. I think other moments have probably felt the same at the time, but actually when you look back and look at things in perspective in the grand scheme of things, actually going through something like that really makes you appreciate everything else. And actually I retired from the sport, but all the experiences I had, the people I met, and the places I got to travel, I wouldn't have got to do that otherwise. So I think big life moments like that put things in perspective.
Are you comfortable with sort of opening that up to people now? Because you've just come off the back of the presentation where you've had to stand up there and people have been asked to talk about their most difficult times in their lives.
Yeah.
Is that something you've sort of had to warm into, or are you able to be quite open about it when you are giving or doing sessions with mentees and things?
So I've never really spoken about it kind of publicly in front of groups, but I'm happy to talk about it when people ask or if it comes up in a conversation. But I think there's quite a lot of messages that come from it that could be something beneficial to share with younger people in the future.
Yeah. Hello everyone, it's Alistair here with a bit of a personal message. Regular listeners will know how important the Mintridge Foundation charity and family is to us on this podcast, and on March the 1st I will be running the Vitality Big Half in London to raise funds for them. Personally speaking, the charity resonates with us strongly on the show, particularly their approach to sport and to mental health is obviously very similar to ours. So this is my personal plea to you, the listeners, to find 5 minutes in your day to donate to my fundraising page for this fantastic cause. You can find the link on my Twitter page. My username is @ADJHooper1992, and it is the pinned tweet on my account. Or you can find a link to the fundraising page in the show notes of this episode. I and the charity would be so grateful if you could spare a £5 or a £10 to help support the charity's amazing work as I try and get my way round the streets of London in about 6 weeks' time. Thank you. This is kind of where I bring in your role as an ambassador with Mintridge. Is that part of the reason you felt it was so important to get involved with the charity in the first place?
I always feel like throughout my career, I just absolutely loved having role models. And I watched countless hours of YouTube videos of different athletes doing interviews and talking about their journeys. And even if it wasn't someone in gymnastics and a variety of different sports, different levels, ages, genders, it didn't matter to me. I just loved sport. I loved hearing about the incredible things people had done. And when I met Alex and had the opportunity to become an ambassador, it was something I was 100% keen to be involved in, and I absolutely love it.
How does it feel being considered a role model to others now? It's a bit weird.
I think it's really nice. I like it. It still feels a bit strange because when I look back, I'm just Grace from the Isle of Man. But actually, I think what we've definitely found here today is everyone has their own story and their own lessons they've learned that they can then share with others. And I think that's a really nice thing about being an ambassador.
On that, and in that you say you're just Grace from the Isle of Man. But in terms of your identity, what are you now? Are you still a gymnast? Are you a gymnast coach? Do you have sort of multiple identities now?
Yeah, so it took a while to get, when someone would say, who are you? I'm Grace and the gymnast. But now I've got to the stage where I'm happy to say Grace, the ex-gymnast. now working for the Talented Athlete Scholarship Scheme. So I work particularly with women's footballers there, so that's kind of taken a huge part of my identity now as someone who's really passionate about helping athletes achieve not only in sport but also in education and in their personal lives outside of that as well.
Exactly. And my finishing few questions are about sort of the power of sport and what it can do for people. And my first one will kind of be about the women in sport side of things.
Yeah.
And obviously this is something you can speak about personally, is that how important is sport to you, and how important is it to get more women involved in sport? Because that's something certainly everyone in this room I know has been shouting out for and crying out for, but slowly it's starting to happen, but we're still not quite where it should be at the moment.
I think there's so much sport can do regardless of who you are, where you're from. It's just, sport is a platform to so many different avenues, and it's not about performing at the highest level and going to the Olympics and getting a gold medal. Like, all of that would be absolutely fantastic, but it's also about the people you can meet, the places you get to visit, whether that's a local club down the road, and you can make lifelong friends and have experiences you'd never be able to experience without sport. But then you've also got the mental health side of things as well, and sport is such an important driving force there in terms of getting people active and making sure they're physically and mentally well, and sport is just so powerful.
Exactly. I mean, do you think there's still sort of barriers in place that stop people, kids, girls as well, from getting into sport, and how do we change that, and how do we get more involved? Because obviously it helps having people like you going into schools, but I suppose there's other issues that we all need to address as well.
I think it's opening, especially young girls, opening their eyes to all the different types of sports that are out there. Sport's not just running. I think some people are kind of put off by their perceptions of what it is, but actually, as we've seen here today, the amount of ambassadors from such a wide variety of different sports, there's so much out there, and there's always something for someone, and they might not find that passion and that love for a certain sport straight away, but actually it's trying to help guide girls in a direction where they find the thing that they love, that they enjoy, and then they can go and have all those fantastic experiences.
Exactly. Before I ask my last question, since it's Christmas and Alex has told us to pull crackers, go. I won, everyone. And I'll have to get you to read out the joke. This is the comedy moment on the show.
Why did the turkey join the band?
God. Why did the turkey join the band?
Because it had the drumsticks.
Wow. Perfectly delivered. Expect more bad jokes on more podcasts recorded from today. Last question. Going forward now, I mean, do you set yourself targets? Have you got aims? Do you kind of know what you want to do now, considering you are still relatively new in your current role?
Yeah. Just have as big an impact as I can on the greatest number of young people in sport. I think there's so many people that are out there that hopefully can share my story with and have an impact on, and actually share my experiences as a student athlete, and the importance of kind of developing yourselves in both areas, not just in sport. So just spread that message and talk to as many people as I can, and hopefully be able to share my journey, and then see lots of young people going on their journey.
Exactly, and like you say, we've seen that powerful message loud and clear today from everyone in this room, and stories like yours are perfect examples of how you can bounce back from the tough times, and how kids can use it to their benefit as well, because they will then inevitably come across some tough times in their life as well. But thank you so much, Grace.
Thank you very much for having me.
And look forward to the crazy catch challenge later.
Yeah, I'm curious. As a gymnast, my hand-eye coordination isn't very good. So.
We might try and video it and see what happens. But no, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
A big thank you to Grace and to the Mintridge Foundation for their help and time in organising this interview. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with our next feature interview that we recorded during those training days. Before I go, there's a few messages that need sharing. First off, you may have heard an advert at the start of this episode for Superpod 2020. It's a fantastic 2-day podcast event, all in aid of sport relief, and we will be doing our first ever live show there. So you can see us at 8 p.m. on the Saturday night, that's March the 7th at The Social in Southampton. A link to the Superpod 2020 website is in the show notes where you can get tickets. Other than that, do follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. All of our handles are SportSpielPod, and please do leave us a rating on the podcast platform of your choice, as it helps others to find us. Lastly, if you can donate to my half marathon attempts, that would be amazing. Until next time, listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.